Okay, well, welcome everyone. I'm Sue Keisler, Executive Director of xMinds, the organization hosting tonight's event. So our presentation tonight is called Understanding Neurodiversity-Affirming Care. And since that term may not be familiar to everyone, I'll give you a very abbreviated definition. But by the end of this webinar, you will all understand it very well. So neurodiversity-affirming care for individuals who are autistic or are in some other way neurodivergent is an approach that embraces the way in which these individuals differ from neurotypical individuals, supporting them for who they are rather than seeking to change them to fit a neurotypical mold. Our three presenters are all mental health care professionals who provide support for individuals who are diagnosed with autism. They also each identify as being neurodiverse themselves, so they bring that important lived experience to their work. Dr. Jacqueline Halpern is a licensed psychologist and the director, co-founder, and clinical supervisor of the SOAR program, which provides psychotherapy and testing for individuals of all ages at Washington Behavioral Medicine Associates. Max Lamb is a licensed resident in counseling with a master's in clinical mental health counseling. They provide therapy services at the SOAR program, and Max especially enjoys supporting those who are exploring their neurodivergence and LGBTQIA+ related needs. Laura Morlock, our third presenter, is a licensed clinical professional counselor and registered play therapist supervisor. She is the founder of Playful Therapy Connections, which specializes in supporting neurodivergent children, teens, young adults, and families. We're very grateful to these three dedicated professionals for taking the time to share their expertise with us tonight. Jacqueline, Laura, and Max will answer questions after their presentation, which will probably be around 8:15. Audience members, please go ahead and put your questions in the chat at any time in Spanish or English. Jacqueline, Laura, and Max, thank you so much for being with us tonight. I will turn it over to you now.
Hey everyone, we're so glad to be here and so glad that you can join us tonight. As Sue said, we're going to be talking about providing affirming support and care for autistic individuals. I am Dr. Jacqueline Halpern. My pronouns are she, her. I'm a licensed psychologist in Maryland, DC, Virginia, and Delaware, and the co-founder of the SOAR program for psychotherapy and testing at Washington Behavioral Medicine Associates. I identify as a highly sensitive person with a lot of sensory processing differences. I'm going to turn it over now to Laura.
Hey, I'm Laura. My pronouns are she, her. I'm a licensed clinical professional counselor in Maryland, a licensed professional counselor in Virginia and DC, and a registered play therapist supervisor, as well as the owner of Playful Therapy Connections and bonus, a late diagnosed ADHDer.
Hi, I'm Max. All pronouns are good with me. I'm a licensed resident in counseling with the SOAR program for Virginia and any day now also with Maryland. I am autistic.
Well, Jacqueline, Max, and I have created this presentation for caregivers with recently diagnosed children and for anyone wanting to learn more about seeking affirming support for autistic individuals in their lives. We hope to give an overview of key considerations, answer some questions, and really give you resources that are going to help you dive deeper into understanding neurodiversity-affirming care. We all know that language is incredibly important. It can help frame our experiences and express our perspectives. So let's start with the definition that is the foundation of what we're here to talk about. Judy Singer, an Australian sociologist, coined the term neurodiversity in 1998. She explains that, quote, neurodiversity refers to the virtually infinite neurocognitive variability within Earth's human population. It points to the fact that every human has a unique nervous system with a unique combination of abilities and needs. Neurodiversity is a state of nature to be respected, a tool for examining social issues, and an argument for the conservation and facilitation of human diversity. All neurotypes are valuable and necessary for a thriving society. We may hear the term neurodiversity being used interchangeably with autism and or ADHD, when in fact it's an umbrella term that covers an entire spectrum of neurotypes, and it's meant to be an inclusive term, though today we are focusing specifically on autism. In moving from the definition of what neurodiversity is, let's talk about the neurodiversity paradigm. Dr. Nick Walker, queer autistic scholar and author, explains the three fundamental principles of the neurodiversity paradigm. First, neurodiversity is not only natural, but valuable. Second, it's simply false to believe that there's a single type of brain that's healthy or normal. And third, neurodiversity provides for the expression of social dynamics that are similar to those that we see in other forms of human diversity, such as in diversity of ethnicity, gender, or culture. It is in those social dynamics that we find the social power inequalities that allow ableism to flourish, but where that same human diversity, when celebrated instead of shunned, can offer great creative potential. We also want to look at two models of disability, the first of which is the medical model. People with Disability Australia defines the medical model of disability as viewing disability as a health condition dealt with by medical professionals. People with disability are thought to be different from what is normal, seen as abnormal. Disability is seen to be a problem of the individual. From the medical model, a person with disability is in need of being fixed or cured. And from this point of view, disability is a tragedy, and people with disability are to be pitied. The medical model of disability is all about what a person cannot do and cannot be. In contrast, the social model of disability sees disability as the result of the interaction between people living with impairments and an environment that is filled with physical, attitudinal, communication, and social barriers. Therefore, carries the implication that the physical, attitudinal, communication, and social environment must change to enable people living with impairments to participate in society on an equal basis with others. All of this is to say that different neurotypes exist. No neurotype is inherently disordered or bad, and no neurotype is inherently better or good. They're just different. The problem is that the world is set up for those who are neurotypical, and the accommodations that are available are really only for those whose differences present themselves in a way that's visible to others. Within the neurodiversity affirmative model, our goal is to understand that all neurotypes or brain styles involve both strengths and vulnerabilities. And we want to move towards a model of equity where everyone can uniquely engage in the world in ways that allow them to flourish. As you may know, the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, 5th edition, text revision, or DSM-5, contains the diagnostic guidelines and criteria for medical and mental health professionals. It's based in the medical model of disability, and as such, the diagnostic criteria for autism currently is based on a neurotypical lens and uses such words as deficits, abnormal, failure, inflexibility, highly restricted. In response, Matt Lowry, an autistic clinician and assessor, has formulated strengths-based autism criteria that's framed in the social disability model that speaks to the autistic experience of the neurotype. Matt makes some important notes about the criteria. Autistic people are born with these traits, but may learn how to mask them in order to appear neurotypical or fit in. The term high masking is often used to describe autistic individuals who are able to perform neurotypicality in public spaces, such as at school or at work. Matt also points out that these traits are not due to intellectual disability and are primarily things that cause other people distress. To meet the diagnostic criteria for autism, according to the DSM-5, a person must have persistent differences in each of 3 areas of social communication and interaction. And Matt describes these differences as follows. Differences in communication. This can look like a tendency to go off on tangents, talk passionately about special interests, and to prefer not to engage in small talk. Then there's differences in nonverbal communication, such as stimming. Excuse me, hold on. Such as stimming or looking, oh my gosh, this is terrible. My daughter is sick today, so this is probably me catching up to her. Differences in nonverbal communication, such as stimming or looking away from a conversational partner while talking and being bored with conversations. So due to these communication differences, autistic people tend to be shunned and by neurotypicals and become conditioned to believe that they are somehow less social, thereby reinforcing the stereotype that they have social deficits. So in addition to the persistent differences in social communication and interaction, there must be at least 2 of the 4 types of repetitive behaviors or interests, which Matt describes as follows: stimming or engaging in echolalia, which is the repetition of vocalizations or sounds. And due to not having a sensory filter, autistic people experience the world as a constant state of chaos. Routines and expectations give comfort to overwhelmed autistic people who therefore find security in routines. Then we have special interest or spins. So due to hyperconnected brains, autistic people feel more passionately about what they love. So when they have a special interest, they tend to dive deep and fixate on it. And due to the aforementioned hyperconnections, autistic people feel things more intensely and can be hyperreactive to stimuli. Sometimes, however, they may be hyporeactive or feel things less intensely when excess stimuli is turned out in favor of preferred stimuli. Here's Matt's visual of what the autism spectrum actually looks like, again, from the social model of disability rather than the medical model. Instead of a horizontal spectrum spanning from right to left, or describing an autistic individual as high versus low functioning, or assigning a level, 1, 2, or 3, this model makes clear that the experience of autistic individuals varies greatly across each of these domains, not only overall, but also based on their environment and current supports. And you can go right to Matt's website to grab a copy of this and some other great infographics. We'll make sure you have a link to that as well.
Claire, we had a question about either making the slideshow smaller or somehow adjusting it on the screen so that people can see the references at the bottom.
That's probably something weird going on with my screen. Is that better?
I don't know, because I wasn't the one who asked, but it looks like it made it a little bit smaller and then brought more of the screen in. So hopefully.
I think there's a problem just with some of the earlier slides when the reference was way down at the very bottom. So it's a little hard to tell on this one because I think there isn't a reference at the bottom. But I think it might be a little better.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, so we're going to move into talking about how caregivers can help, which is really the chunk of what we're talking about today, since many people here are caregivers or providers. And the thing to understand is that these are ways that we can help, whether we are parents, grandparents, other kind of caregivers, doctors, teachers, anyone who is working with kiddos can really embrace this paradigm shift and help. So in doing this, first we need to understand a child does not need therapy, medication, or any specific kind of support just because they're neurodivergent or autistic. They might need it because of coexisting diagnoses, distress, or environmental mismatches, which goes back to the social model that Laura was talking about. One of the things that we can do to help is to begin by centering autistic voices. And we put a few of our favorite memes here for you to look at as you think about that. But really hearing the voices of autistic people who can share their own experiences and really tell us what is most helpful for them. We can also shift our language, our lens, and our approach. And this is key. And again, these tools are for everyone, not just for parents, right? We can shift to identity first language. And it's very important. Any autistic person will tell us what their preference is in terms of language, but the general autistic population as a whole has really shifted to identity first language as a preference. So think autistic person as opposed to person with autism. Autistic, not on the spectrum or with ASD. There's also a move away from functioning labels into support needs. So thinking of someone as having higher support needs or lower support needs, but it's very important to also keep in mind that support needs are likely to change. And they're likely to change potentially throughout a day based on environment, based on any number of factors affecting the individual. And so even using a term like support needs can be a little bit misleading if we're putting it on there as a concrete label. We need to recognize that it is always changing. We want to talk about strengths and support and a person's needs rather than thinking about only impairments or deficits as we have tended to in the past in the medical model. We want to presume competence, and we want to look for services based on our kids' expressed needs. What do they need? What do they want? What do they desire? Where do they feel like they need support? And obviously we need to help with the judgment of that. Kids are not always able to identify themselves with words, but we can look at their behaviors. We can look at where they're struggling. We can look at their sensory needs to help to identify what is most important. We want to learn about the double empathy problem, which we're going to talk about a bit later. And we want to move away from the traditional teaching of social skills. Instead, we want to help our kids decode what's going on around them when they have questions or concerns or they're confused. And we want to help them know that they can make changes in their interactions based on what's comfortable for them rather than based on neurotypical social standards. We want to look at changing the environment for our child, as opposed to asking our child to change to fit those social norms or those environmental norms. And again, we want to think about differences or vulnerabilities along with strengths, not weaknesses, not impairments. And think about words like traits and supports versus symptoms or treatments or interventions. So we're changing the language across the board. And when we do that, we automatically begin to shift the way that we see autism and autistic people.
Okay, so in order to make our language more accurate and supportive, here's the beginning of a list of terms that we should know. And I'm not going to go over every single term in this list, so I suggest you to maybe take a picture or a screenshot to learn these later. Partially, that is kind of a way for me to demonstrate that it is not my job. While I'm here, I'm happy to talk about my experience. Obviously, I opted to do this, and I love to teach people about autism. Ultimately, it's not my burden as an autistic person to have to educate you on everything if you're not autistic, that it is our community's duty to be learning these things on our own. So let's see, let's talk about masking on this list, because I think that is a big piece of why we have this paradigm shift, because we're moving away from understanding that autism does not look like this one stereotype, but that it is a spectrum that looks like many different types of people. And for many people like myself, we grew up not knowing we're autistic. And so we masked, we acted like everyone around us by either adding behaviors that we usually wouldn't do, like eye contact. It's not natural for me to be looking you in the eye when I talk to you, but growing up, that's what everyone did. That's what everyone commented on. And so I kind of put that on myself without even realizing it. I started making eye contact. Or by taking behaviors away, like it would be very comfortable for me to be bouncing and rocking back and forth and that sort of thing while I'm talking. But as I've masked growing up, I have learned not to do those things so that I can be, quote, socially appropriate. So this next slide has some more terms that we should know. Hold on a moment. Okay. So spoon theory, I can get into that because that's starred here. I don't think we have that later. Right, guys? So spoon theory is—
I do have spoon theory. I do have a slide on spoon theory later.
Okay, so that's why that started. So that we'll get into later. Autistic burnout is a big, important topic that oftentimes we have clients come in presenting with symptoms of depression. And it's not actually depression, it's more better explained by autistic burnout. And so people are often getting treated for depression when it's not so much accurate to be depression. So autistic burnout is just the explanation that if you are experiencing heightened sensitivity to stimuli all the time, and you're masking all the time, and you're existing in a neurotypical world, and your needs aren't being met, that you get burned out so easily. Sometimes this looks like for months or years at a time that a person will be struggling to work or struggling to get out of their house, or sometimes it might be a more minor short term. I know when I get burned out, week to week, or even just working as a therapist, that is what contributes to me having periods of being nonverbal. So yeah, take a picture of this if you need to learn more about these other terms that we don't have the time to get into.
Okay, so moving back into talking specifically about supports. So it's really important to understand there is no one size fits all support approach. You have to recognize that a child does not necessarily require support just because they're autistic. I think I said that a few minutes ago, and I'm going to say that probably a few more times because it's very important to understand. When we are seeking support, we want to think about the whole person, and we want to make sure that the child and the family can actively participate in embracing who they are, who the child is, having the child consent to the supports that they want and they're comfortable with, and focusing on strengths to aid positive growth when the child wants to embrace some change. We again want to look at ways to shift the environment. We want to consider sensory needs, and we really want to focus on improving communication between neurotypical and neurodivergent family members. We want to recognize that neither needs to change just because of how their brain works. Instead, we want to embrace the differences and work to understand each other. So we're focusing on connection rather than on rewards and punishments when we're thinking about change and support, building self-esteem and self-compassion, and reducing shame. One way we can do this is to build connection in every interaction to shift our lens. And so, my advice to parents is often slow down, take the time to get to know your child and really marvel at who they are as an individual. Notice their strengths, their interests, their skills. Pay attention to how they think and speak and learn and what's really dynamic and special about them. Reflect on the ways that they're growing. So often in the medical model, we're looking at the concerns, and I urge parents to reflect on positive mirror traits. For example, maybe a child can't focus very well on their homework, but they can spend all day creating a detailed Lego structure or drawing a picture or programming a computer or whatever their special interest is that they have just dive into, and they can focus so beautifully and learn everything and become a true expert. Engage with your kids around their interests and share your own. Very often, if something that you say sparks their interest, that will become another spin for them, and then you have a shared interest there. Really take the time to listen. And when I say listen again, it may not be listening to their words. You're listening to them in every possible way, everything that they're showing you with their body, with their interests, with the way that they engage with the world. Set daily one-on-one time with your child. Let them lead the play or the activity. Put your electronics away. You can talk about that being a difference if that is a spin for your child, how to engage with that. But make sure your phone is out of the way. You're not getting phone calls, and give your child your full attention. Even if it's just 10 minutes a day, it can make a tremendous difference in their well-being. Use your child's strengths, interests, and skills to help offset their vulnerabilities, to build their self-esteem, to create a stronger connection between you as you engage with them, to help them manage transitions and help them cool down after or during difficult moments, and even to repair when you make a mistake. We all do it, right? Whatever role we are in, parent, teacher, therapist, we make mistakes, but the opportunity to repair shows our kids that we are human too. And it can really build the connection when we go back and say, hey, I messed up. I don't like how I did that. And it really teaches our kids to do the same thing. When we think about seeking affirming supports, we really want to know what we're looking for. And so when we think about therapy, historically in the medical model, we were looking at, again, deficits, and therapy that is ableist still tends to do that. When we think about ableist, we think about the idea that the society is telling the individual what they should be and how they should be, and people tend to internalize this. This promotes masking, and it teaches them to be someone that they are not. often in a way that is very violating to the individual. It forces them to lose their autonomy. It can cause emotional and physiological harm, psychological harm. And so we need to look at those costs and move away from those types of therapies that tend to embrace ableism and force a child to be someone who they're not. Respectful therapy presumes competence and recognizes personal agency. Right? Self-advocacy is a huge piece of it. It focuses on getting the individual what they want and need. It engages the child through their interests and focuses on areas of identified distress. Right? What is distressing to them? And it's often based in what we call the relational neurosciences. So there is research to back up this kind of therapy. Also think about testing. Most kids, when they're getting diagnosed, end up needing to go through neuropsych testing. While within this paradigm, we absolutely take self-diagnosis very, very seriously and want people to be able to self-identify. To be able to access accommodations in school, we often need formal testing. And so we want testing that takes a strengths-based approach. We want the testing to help the child better understand their brain, who they are, and the family to do the same. We don't want the child that we write about to not sound like that kiddo. We want them to sound like themselves. We want testing that helps identify supports to address vulnerabilities, and that also highlights and explores strengths to help overcome or balance out those vulnerabilities. We want testing that helps us learn about the brain in ways that help us identify, hey, this could be a path for a hobby, a career, what you want in relationships, and helps with general well-being. The testing should help to identify those positive mirror traits that I talked about before and frame differences in terms of neurodiversity or brain style rather than focusing on deficits. So that language should be affirming: difference versus deficit, vulnerability versus weakness. And we want the recommendations to be evidence-based, not based in reward and punishment models, however. And, we have to give feedback to kids. We have to give feedback to parents to help them learn about their brains. And this can be tough because not everyone wants to hear an autistic diagnosis or any number of other diagnoses. And so, again, we want to make sure that we are helping parents see, hey, this sounds like my kid. And we're connecting the dots by telling the story in this affirming, positive, strengths-based way. Because when we're positive, parents and caregivers are more likely to embrace that, to understand this is the why. And your kid has all of these cool things going on, and here are the challenges. Here's how we help. And if we begin to help parents see a balanced person, a whole person, then it also helps parents carry that on when they're talking to their kids about their brain differences as well. So it so much starts with us as providers. When those of us who are providers here, when the language that we use, the tone that we set in understanding autism actually can help caregivers to do the same. Now we want to talk about what respectful psychiatric care looks like. So again, we're looking at the whole person. We're maximizing nutrition, exercise, and sleep. We may evaluate genetics to inform underlying differences and potentially inform medication efficacy. And this can be also helpful if there is a genetic difference underlying. Are there other medical things that might be going on that we need to identify? We can consider brain modulation. So non-medication based supports like TMS, neurofeedback, ETNS. We want medication to assist with distressing and unwanted coexisting diagnoses and unwanted sensations like anxiety or mood fluctuations, irritability, impulsivity, not medication just because someone is autistic. So often when we are supporting an autistic kiddo, we want to look at the team approach. Right? Many autistic kids benefit from supports in a variety of areas. It might be a combination of play or talk therapy, testing for understanding their brains more accurately, medication management or non-medication based medical supports like we just talked about. Occupational therapy is a wonderful tool because sensory needs being met can make a huge difference in how well an autistic child is feeling in their environment. We might look at tutoring depending on the particular need. In each of these cases, also speech therapy. And when we're thinking about speech therapy, we want to keep in mind that that speech therapy should also be affirming, as should these other therapies. And the speech therapy can help decode, as we said before, what's going on in neurotypical conversation, help a child understand so that they have the tools to recognize what is happening around them, but also teach them to embrace their own communication styles and figure out what's comfortable for them, and to communicate that to those people around them, rather than just trying to teach them what everyone else is doing or telling them that they should do what everyone else is doing, which can really increase masking and cause a lot of negativity for an autistic kiddo. So we're always trying to increase comfort and communicate in a way that really supports those individual differences and helps people feel better, as opposed to feeling like they are somehow bad or wrong or feel shame. So traditionally, ABA has been used in a lot of cases for autism, along with other kinds of rewards and consequences. The problem is that inherent in these systems is shame. ABA really tells kids, you are wrong in how you are and you need to be different. And a lot of times the way that ABA is utilized, even what we call new ABA, is very rewards and consequence based. It can take away things that kids love or deny them things that they love, from people to foods and everything in between. And it can give them a sense that they are not in charge of their own body. They can start to have trouble trusting the sensations in their bodies or their needs if they are told that they have to be different. And what we know is that kids do well if they can. If they can't, punishing them, shaming them does not help, right? Even if what we're doing is offering rewards, if they can't achieve it, it increases shame. And this happens a lot of times in the classroom as well, right? Rewards and consequence behavior charts, for example, can really single out autistic kiddos if they can't meet the classroom expectations because of their inherent needs, and they shouldn't be punished for it. So we're looking at, as we said before, the relational neurosciences. So people like Mona Delahook, Ross Green, Dan Siegel, and Tina Payne Bryson have done research in how to utilize therapy, how to understand sensory systems, how to understand the brain and work with it in a way that helps to reduce shame, increase autonomy, and promote health and well-being. Similarly, traditionally, in a lot of places, people use social thinking curriculum and social stories. The problem inherent in the social thinking curriculum is that the villains are all autistic and neurodivergent traits. And that's really tough for a kid who's looking at this stuff saying, hey, everything about me, they're saying it's bad. I have heard that Michelle Garcia Winner, who has created social thinking, is working on a new curriculum to address these needs. And that is the hope, because there are some good nuggets in there, but pulling them out can be very challenging. Social stories too are tough because traditionally they're all about teaching the child about the neurotypical social norms. We can use social stories if we create them with the child and we keep in mind the child's needs as well as the needs of the neurotypical people around them, and helping the child to understand and balance their own needs. So we have to craft them for the individual to be able to be themselves rather than to expect them to be more neurotypical.
So this visual was made by Sunny Jane Wise, who is neurodivergent, and they call themselves a lived experience educator. They have really fantastic resources that I would highly recommend. If you're into DBT, there's a Neurodiversity-Affirming DBT workbook they made that's awesome. But anyway, so by focusing on these green flags, we pose that a neurodivergent affirming practice would, for instance, use special interests to engage with the individual rather than withholding special interests in order to achieve obedience. It respects when the person says no rather than pushing them by holding rewards over them. It centers and respects the individual's goals and needs and interests based on their own timeline, rather than pushing an agenda that either the provider or the parent or the teacher wants for them. It considers and plans for sensory needs rather than ignoring them. Let's see, so the next one, it allows the individuals to define what is ideal functioning for them, rather than trying to change their behavior to be what's, quote, typical. This is where the client gets to define the success for themselves. It accepts co-regulation and interdependence as valid, rather than focusing on this kind of Western idea of hyper independence. It focuses on what is meaningful and what would the individual define as quality, rather than focusing on binary ways of thinking, like what is right versus wrong, or what is normal versus abnormal. And it is accepting of alternative methods of communication rather than trying to force spoken communication. It understands the reasons and thoughts and feelings behind behaviors and actions, that even if they might be, undesirable, rather than labeling these behaviors and actions without trying to understand the function behind them. It focuses on reducing distress and accommodating differences rather than reducing symptoms. And this is where worth is considered to be always present, always inherent, rather than worth being based on what a person is able to do. An environment that uses these red flags likely has beautiful intentions. The problem is that our culture has biases that seep into everything that we do. And so inevitably, even myself, we all as teachers, providers, parents, we cause harm to the people we love sometimes because we're affected by biases in our culture. So we can't help that we've been steeped in these prejudice ideas, but once we become aware of them, it's our job to address them and reframe them.
So just a few additional red flags within the neurodiversity paradigm. As we said, ABA, including new ABA, would be a flag. Even floor time, which is generally overall considered as a positive support, to be careful because there are times when parents are treated through an ABA-like system, and then that becomes problematic. PCIT, also known for having some beautiful parent-child interaction, but there are aspects of it that also are very behaviorally based and mimic parts of ABA. Even parts of more traditional CBT and DBT, exposure therapy, can take away an individual's trust in themselves. So it's very important to have a provider who understands how to use all of these in an affirming way. The neurodiversity-affirming paradigm says no to autism speaks because they are steeped in the medical model. As we said before, same with social skills training, or the puzzle piece is a symbol for autism. Moving away from PBIS, which is another reward system that's often used in schools in particular, things like behavior charts, sticker charts, clip charts, and traditional language that we hear in school, crisscross applesauce. Keep your whole body still, your hands in your lap, quiet hands, quiet body, traditional active listening skills. These do not always end up supporting our kids. In fact, most of the time, they ask our kids to be someone who they're not and cause them to feel uncomfortable in their own bodies.
Okay, can I interrupt you for just a second, Dr. Halpern? Someone has asked for clarification on how floor time could be a red flag. And I didn't understand that either, how parents are treated through an ABA system. Can you explain what you mean?
In floor time, it's all about, and I am not a floor time specialist, so I don't want to misspeak here, but in floor time, it's all about really following the child's lead, which is wonderful and beautiful and exactly what we're looking for. But in traditional floor time models, the parents are actually treated kind of through a punishment and reward system of their own, as I understand it, where they are asked to follow very specific rules and they are corrected in a way that can be very shaming. And so while it may not be unaffirming for the child, it becomes unaffirming for the parents, which can really create a rift in the relationship that we're trying to build. So it's not that floor time is inherently problematic. It can be wonderful and very appropriate. We just want to make sure that the provider understands the affirming approach and understands that we're trying to create connection and not in any way shame anyone. Kind of understanding that just like kids do well if they can, so do caregivers, and making sure we're meeting the caregivers where they are as well.
Yeah, to add what Jacqueline is saying, similarly, I mentioned DBT earlier. That is a therapeutic approach that in itself is not problematic. I use it all the time. The issue is that sometimes the traditional uses of it are not taking into account neurodivergent needs. And so we are mentioning caution for these different models, not necessarily saying that they inherently are problematic. So moving on from, we've been talking about how to identify supports that are affirming versus not based on the neurodiversity paradigm. This next slide is a fun little just collection of a few things that come to mind for me when I think of autistic culture, because if you're at all familiar with deaf culture, they have developed their own culture, really, their own norms, their own preferences. Like, it's not just about that we are a group of people who cannot hear. We are a group of people that now have similar customs, and that is what we see with autistic culture as well. And I will say that these pictures here are certainly more emblematic of white autistic culture, because that's my experience, and maybe even white queer autistic culture. But just to, have a little fun, like, we've got this Steven Universe poster on the right here. That is a cartoon that was made by a neurodivergent person and has neurodivergent characters in it. And in general, animation is a stereotypical autistic special interest for many people. Below that is, if you've ever heard of LARPing, which is a live action role play, that's a big, common interest among a lot of autistic people. Or, cosplaying, that sort of thing, because there's such a passion for different, Marvel universe or whatever it is. Up above there, you see some tabletop gaming like Dungeons and Dragons. There's even therapy modalities that make use of Dungeons and Dragons or video games in order to connect and reap therapeutic value from them. That's awesome. Laura on this call is amazing at that sort of thing. I have the Discord, if you've heard of that. That is a social media platform that I'm just highlighting the idea that autistic people often prefer not non-face-to-face communication. And Discord is one that I just find very common. And under that, the idea of playing songs on repeat. Like, when I talk to autistic people, these are just the things that come to mind that we joke about, that are kind of, inside jokes about the richness of our experience. We've got dinosaur chicken nuggets up there at the title, because that includes the safe food of chicken nuggets that, it's a chicken nugget is the same food every time, opposed to like a blueberry is going to be squishy one time and sour another time. And also they're dinosaur shaped, and dinosaurs are a stereotypical autistic special interest. Below that, I'm showing off like collections that we see autistic people love to collect things. So yeah, I just wanted to put that in here because it's fun, and I want to highlight, the passion in autistic culture. So this is a phrase, nothing about us without us, that's often used by the disabled community, which plenty of autistic people consider themselves to be a part of that, whether it's because they're autistic or because of, I don't know what the research is saying, but we do happen to see a lot of autistic people with physical issues like POTS. But anyway, so about lived experience, I'm here speaking as an autistic person. Imagine that you notice that your throat is hurting, and so you look in the mirror and you see that it's all red and inflamed, and so you're like, this might be strep throat. You do some Googling, that's matching up. You ask other people who have strep throat and they say, yeah, it's probably strep. So you go to the doctor, you tell them, hey, I've done some research, I've done some self-reflection, I think I have strep. And they look at you and they say, you don't have strep throat because you're able to speak with me right now. If you had strep throat, your throat would be hurting too badly to be able to speak with me right now. So that was my experience in my first time trying to get diagnosed. And that is a very similar experience of so many other people I've spoken to and heard about, of realizing that they are autistic and then going to the doctor and being told, stop trying to be trendy, stay out of your DSM. And I bring this up because the value of lived experience is so important, that sometimes professionals are actually the most ableist people I come across, because they have had all this training and their schooling about what autism looks like, that when they see somebody who's a little bit different than that, they think they know better. So, they think they're not autistic, and I don't blame them for that. But this is to highlight the importance of listening to people and listening to their experiences and putting that as a priority, maybe rather than a textbook definition that was written by a very limited population of authors. So intersectionality, we felt, was an important concept to bring up, meaning the interconnected nature of social categories like race, class, gender, that these create overlapping and interdependent systems of both discrimination or disadvantage. So in other words, to make a giant topic short, it's important to keep in mind that a person is not autistic just in a vacuum, that their experience is shaped by intersecting social factors that come with privileges as well as oppression. One thing specifically that you should know is that there is a significant overlap between autism and queerness. So autistic people are more likely than non-autistic people to be trans or gay. On the right side there, you can see that was just a search I did the other day on Google Scholar. You can see there are, I can't read the number, but tons of results, and there's been tons of recent research on this. There's a great book by Eva Mendez and Meredith Maroney on this topic. So yes, it's just important that while we're talking about autism today, we need to keep in mind, for instance, a Black autistic person is going to look a lot different than a white autistic person, and this is why they're often misdiagnosed or overlooked.
So Janae Elizabeth, aka Trauma Geek, which is what they go by online, is an autistic person who has both lived experience with and a special interest in complex trauma. And Janae created this graphic to differentiate between autistic traits, which are innate divergence based on the autistic neurotype, and autistic trauma, distress symptoms caused by developmental trauma. And Janae explains, quote, being denied connection because of our differences is a core trauma wound for most autistics, and that living on the right side of this list, and they're speaking specifically about the autistic trauma side, is not sustainable long-term for any autistic person. The symptoms of autistic trauma are a significant threat to autistic health and survival. When autistic people seek help with trauma symptoms, it is important for care providers to know that healthy autistic people can have significant support needs. And a reduction in trauma symptoms does not mean a person will become more independent. And I do want to point out that the use of the word survival that Janae has in there is not an exaggeration, because we do know that there are higher suicide rates among autistic individuals. And a lot of this is created by the trauma that we're talking about here and the ways in which we have yet to embrace the neurodiversity affirming paradigm. And this particular graphic, along with many others, are on their website, traumageek.com. Highly recommend. This is going to be a little bit similar to what Max mentioned earlier, but I'm going to add a bit more to it on some other, some other labels. So we also want to look at the differences between autistic meltdown, shutdown, and burnout. Meltdown is probably what we're all most familiar with, but we may not have recognized exactly what it is. It's frequently perceived as defiance or non-compliance, and it often involves externalizing behaviors that seem to create problems for other people. So it could be shouting, aggression towards self or others, things that are happening that other people are starting to get bothered by. And in reality, what we're witnessing is someone in a state of emotional and sensory overload and even physical pain who's in a nervous system-based fight or flight response. So this is not an active choice to be difficult, not listen, not comply. Autistic shutdown tends to be more internalized and is more likely to include dissociation as a primary coping mechanism. So this could be daydreaming, or it could be sort of internally going away so that you're not experiencing what's going on right in front of you. And it's akin to the freeze response. A person experiencing shutdown often has a decreased ability to process their experience. They often have difficulty communicating and maybe physically unable to remove themselves from the environment. Shutdowns can also be so discreet as to go virtually unnoticed by others. So imagine a quiet kid in the back of a classroom. Maybe they're always quiet and nobody notices. And autistic burnout, as defined in a study conducted by the Academic Autism Spectrum Partnership in Research and Education, is a syndrome conceptualized as resulting from chronic life stress and a mismatch of expectations and abilities without adequate supports. It is characterized by pervasive long-term, typically 3 or more months, and as Max mentioned, even years of exhaustion, loss of function, and reduced tolerance to stimulus. The person experiencing autistic burnout is likely to experience many of the autistic trauma traits identified on the previous slide.
So as we're thinking more about what we can do as caregivers and providers, and even what to look for in the language of therapists and providers, is understanding, as I said before, kids do well if they can. So understanding the difference between can't versus won't. So Drs. Dan Siegel and Tina Payne-Bryson really focus on the can't versus won't in figuring out the why. And when they think about disciplining, they're thinking about teaching and educating, recognizing that a child often misbehaves because they simply can't find a better way of self-regulating in that particular moment. It's not a choice. That is the best thing that they can do. Sometimes we might say that they're being strategic. They're using something that they've seen work before. That often gets confused for manipulative. It's not. It's that the kids don't have a better way of managing the situation. Dr. Ross Green talks about lagging skills and unsolved problems. Again, his language is kids do well if they can. If they can't, we see the behavior that we're concerned about. It's our job to look for the why, to look for the lagging skills, to look for the unsolved problems. And we have to see what is getting in the way and help with the skill building and work with the child to problem solve when there is an unsolved problem and shift our lens and expectation to match where they are in that moment. We know that every child experiences moments of calm, moments of high arousal, and moments of what we call faulty alarms, meaning that they are anxious, that their fight or flight mechanism kicks in when it doesn't need to. This is particularly the case for kiddos with underlying self-regulation challenges like autism and others. That alarm goes off more frequently. So a lot of the times when we're seeing our kids, again, we use the term misbehave or tantrum, it may be a meltdown. And often what happens, even if it's quick, is that they go into fight or flight mode, even if you don't see a full meltdown. What's happening in that moment is their amygdala is activated, their nervous system is in chaos, and they are flooded, and they don't know what to do other than whatever behavior it is that you're seeing is challenging. That's the kids crying for help and trying to protect themselves. So we have to understand, Mona Delahuck talks about the difference between bottom-up and top-down behaviors. So bottom-up or body-up behaviors are self-protective, they are reflexive, they're automatic, there is no conscious thought involved. And a lot of times when we're talking about the behavior that we see with autistic kiddos in a tough moment, we are talking about that bottom-up behavior. Top-down thinking is something that comes over time and involves intentional control over our behaviors and impulses. So executive functions that are working really, really, really well, especially even in a moment that might be difficult. And that is generally not what we're seeing when we see distress in our kiddos. So Mona Delahuck also talks about the developmental iceberg. And she too says we need to look for, attune to, and support the whys underneath the behavior. Could be an internal body process like hunger or thirst, could be a sensation, right? Sensory is a huge thing to focus on when we're talking about autistic kiddos, how they take in the world. An emotion, a thought, a memory, an idea, their motor control, their executive functioning, their developmental capability and processes. These are all things that can impact the behavior that we see on the outside. And so when we're looking for a therapist, looking for a provider, we want to know that they're looking for all of those whys beneath the behavior and trying to help the child with that regulation, teaching the parents co-regulation and emotional attunement, not trying to just change the behavior on the surface.
So the double empathy problem is a way that we can address the traditional misunderstanding that autistic people are not empathetic, that because they have different social communication, they must not know how to read others' emotions, that sort of thing. So basically, this is explaining that an autistic person's empathy might not look like a neurotypical person's empathy, but they still have empathy. It looks different. So on the left here, we have an autistic person, whereas on the right, this is presenting a neurotypical person. Autistic person says, I may struggle to communicate with neurotypical people, but I might have successful social interactions with other autistic people. I might feel the pressure to mask or pass as neurotypical, and I might feel socially isolated in those settings. Whereas on the right, we've got frequently misinterpret communication of autistic people, have successful social interactions with other neurotypical people, assume that autistic people lack social skills, benefit from a society that rewards neurotypical social skills. So there was an informal study, a little like social experiment where they had, if you're familiar with the game telephone that you might have played like in school, where you line up and whisper a word or a phrase to your neighbor, and then you go down the line, each whispering to the next person. And then at the end, you see what message did we end up with, because usually along the way it gets scrambled, and it's funny because it changes into something else. They had a group of autistic people, a group of non-autistic people, and then a group that was mixed up play this game. And in the groups where they were with their same type of person, the message didn't get scrambled up so much. But when they mixed them together, the message got really totally different. And so that's just a fun example of how it's not that we can't communicate or that we're not empathetic. It's just that it's different. So how else can I help if you're here as a caregiver, as a teacher, whatever? Let's try to make home be the safe space where your child feels that they're allowed to unmask if they want. But if they want to mask, if they, feel that they need to mask, that's fine too. But this is where they can rant and rave about their special interests all day. They can stim comfortably, they can act weird, they can find accommodations in the home to meet their sensory needs, and just embrace who they actually are, because existing out in the world, they're going to feel the need to mask in order to survive. They're going to have to put these parts of themselves away so that they can feel comfortable and, frankly, to be successful. Like we've talked about before, seek out your child's strengths and help your child see them. Help your child understand and embrace their differences, normalizing brain differences within your family, where it's not this like binary of one, normal way of thinking and abnormal way of thinking, that we all have brain differences, and autistic is one type of brain difference that we now understand. Help your child, like Jacqueline said earlier, maybe learn about the neurotypical world so that they can better figure out how to function in it, but not necessarily have to internalize these standards for themselves and operate. It's kind of like if someone moves to America from another culture, they might want to understand the culture so that they can operate here better, but that doesn't mean that they have to sacrifice their entire way of being. As a parent, you can, this is a lot of work, but you can educate their teachers, their providers, other family members, so that this child or this autistic person doesn't have to do it themselves.
And we can help through attunement and co-regulation. When you are not sure what else to do to help your kiddo, show up, validate their emotions, empathize, try to recognize that double empathy problem and realize you might be shooting arrows on both sides trying to communicate and missing each other's targets, but you're showing up anyway. You're showing up in a calm state of mind. You're showing up to co-regulate with your child. When their storm meets our calm, co-regulation occurs. And with co-regulation, kids end up internalizing your calm in order to regulate both in the moment and over time. So as another kind of cute little bunch of pictures, we have this one with different ways of co-regulating. Some kids don't like hugs, but you can stay close, you can stay calm, you can make them feel heard, you can look for the why behind the behavior, help when they're ready. Regulate yourself first. Make eye contact if they like eye contact. If not, don't. Be curious and seek to understand. Listen to what they're saying. Show empathy, offer affection. Once they're calm, you can invite them to problem solve with you. But in the moment, get low, come in slow. Make sure you're not above their eye line where you're towering over them and potentially scary. Use a soothing tone of voice. You may have to get louder or quieter to match where they are, but you want to project calm the entire time. This gives your kids cues that they are safe. When they are dysregulated in any way, this is the best way to show up for them and help them in that moment to get to a calm state of mind where they can problem solve.
So alongside that, it also really helps to understand spoon theory. And this is a metaphor coined by writer and blogger Christine Miserandino in 2003 to express her experience of how chronic illness impacts her ability to effectively complete daily tasks that require physical and/or emotional energy. So every morning we wake up with a different number of spoons or units of energy, and the number of spoons we have is impacted by how we slept, how we feel, what our stress levels are, etc. Spoons are used throughout the day and can only be replenished through rest, which can be difficult for autistic and other neurodivergent folks to achieve, especially for those who are in burnout. Sometimes we'll have lots of spoons left over at the end of the day. Other times we have few or none. What we can or can't do and how well we do it will vary day to day based on the number of spoons we have available at the time of the demand. So all this means that an autistic person, their ability to engage in a particular task on one day does not mean that they are able to do so on another day, which is true for everyone. But that's going to mean that their support needs can vary significantly, which is okay.
So how do you navigate a predominantly neurotypical world while embracing the neurodiversity paradigm? It is not easy. The world is not there yet. What we want to do is be allies, spread the word, do the education when and where we can to take pressure off of autistic people while still centering autistic voices whenever we can. We can set the tone, we can presume competence, we can really listen to the autistic person and their needs. We can look at the mismatch between the individual's brain and the environment and try to make the changes so that we are not always putting the burden on the autistic person. We're going to help to identify ableism and work on those environmental changes. We are going to help an autistic individual, child, adult, whomever we're working with, right, understand when they're masking and how that feels to them so they can decide whether or not they need or want to, and support them in looking at both the cost to them of the masking itself and also the ways that they can replenish and engage in self-care if they're choosing to mask. So masking, I don't know, did we define masking? You did, Max, yes. Okay. We want to educate the people around us. Again, be an ally in centering autistic voices. We want to make home that safe landing space and look for that why beneath the behavior. Again, presuming competence and meeting the child where they are, helping them decode so that they understand those neurotypical expectations or social norms, but empowering them to figure out what is comfortable for them rather than encouraging them to mask. Supporting the autistic person and asking for accommodations they need and want, and also in figuring out how and when they want to disclose their autism in different situations. And then again, normalizing brain differences, focusing on strengths as well as vulnerabilities, supporting sensory needs, embracing special interests, and embracing stimming in whatever way is comfortable for the kiddo.
And finally, we want to share our favorite resources with a focus on centering autistic voices, which I hope you have heard us say like a billion times during this past hour. So Confident Kids was created by Evelyn Welton, which I believe is how she pronounces her name, shortly after she found out she was autistic, with a mission to, quote, improve children's self-esteem and build confidence. Evelyn asserts that when autistic kids are taught social skills, they are inadvertently taught that their way of communicating and being is wrong. And we are talking about an autistic child as if they are a passive passenger in their own life, here to be molded and trained by others, rather than seeing them as a human being with rights and autonomy. In contrast, Confident Kids offers a number of neurodiversity-affirming resources and programs for kids that combat the traditional social skills trainings, along with Evelyn's other organization for caregivers and professionals, Awesome Training, which offers a number of fantastic trainings for caregivers and professionals. Many of us are familiar with the zones of regulation that we talked about before, and the intention is to offer a way to match emotions to a zone: blue, green, yellow, red. And unfortunately, the zones are frequently used in a way that advocates for the green zone as the best zone to be in. And I guess I should specify the zones of regulation is part of the social thinking curriculum that was mentioned earlier. Additionally, the zones operate from a neurotypical understanding of emotions and therefore do not really align with the autistic experience of emotions and regulation. So Autism Level Up is an advocacy organization founded by autistic developmental psychologist and self-advocate Jack Feedy and holistic developmental psychologist and pediatric occupational therapist Amy Lawrence. And Jack and Amy have instead created the energy meter that encourages us to look at arousal state versus your current environment. So it's acknowledging that we need different energy levels for different environments and removes the focus from emotions. And in their 2021 publication, Leveling Up Regulatory Support Through Community Collaboration, Jack and Amy explain, quote, the removal of emotion words and a focus on energy and arousal allows us to better avoid the pitfall of labeling states as either negative or positive, good or bad. It moves us forward toward understanding regulation as a goodness of fit between one's internal energy state and the energy that is needed for participation in any given environment and or task, where well-regulated is not one specific state to be in, but is a match between person and environment. Another familiar tool is Listening Larry, who offers up the neurotypical expectations of behavior, such as looking at the speaker, having quiet body, like Jacqueline had mentioned earlier, crisscross applesauce, stay in your circle. For many autistic people, these expectations are in direct contrast to what actually allows them to attend to and process information. So they end up focusing on managing their behavior rather than on the content of a conversation or a lesson. And Autism Level Up created Bumper, the whole body learner within the Neurodiversity-Affirming framework. On their website, you can find this as a free printable that includes a blank version that invites the learner to ask the question, what do you look like when you're learning? And I would encourage you to go to their website. They have a variety of both free and paid resources. This is another link which we will offer. And these, do you want to talk about the resources, or should we just go through them because we're going to offer them and answer questions?
Yeah, we're going to answer questions. Specifically, these are non-speaking resources, which I know were requested. I want to just kind of highlight, or Laura, you can, when we think about a non-speaking individual, we're thinking of someone who is not using verbal language to communicate, but using other language to communicate. So that may be someone who's using an AAC device. It's someone who communicates more through the computer. There's all different ways of communication, and the neurodiversity paradigm really embraces that. And these are some resources specific to non-speaking individuals. Additional resources that we included are other really wonderful OT, Autism Network, the Autism Self-Advocacy Network in particular. The Art of Autism has some beautiful artwork by an autistic creator who shares kind of comics of their life. We have resources for centering autistic voices in general, resources for pathological demand avoidance, which is often in the neurodiversity-affirming paradigm considered persistent demand for autonomy, which is generally considered a more affirming way of describing PDA. PDA is not super recognized in the US. It is much more so in the UK. It is a subset or a particular brain style of autism, where demand avoidance, which is based very much in anxiety, and an anxiety reaction is kind of the central point of the child's presentation. We also have some wonderful resources on talking to autistic kids about their neurotype. We often, as providers, get questions, particularly after testing, how do I tell my kid about this? And this is a great starting point. If you haven't disclosed diagnosis, strongly recommend that you do, because we can help our kids starting young understand and embrace what autism is and who they are, and make sense of the way that they are in the world. And again, when we come from a positive point of view, they are much more likely to embrace that and see themselves in that same way. Now we will take questions.
Great, thank you so much. We have lots of great questions in the chat. The first one is, can you say more about how to differentiate between, quote, lagging skills, unquote, and skills we should not direct? Examples are social skills training or pushing eye contact.
Laura, you want to take this one, or you want me to?
That was your slide. You take it.
Okay. So when Ross Green is talking about lagging skills, he is talking about skills that a child has not yet attained, and may or may not. But what he is actually saying when he talks about lagging skills are we should not be setting expectations around our child if they have not developed skills in a certain area. So a lagging skill may be something like, let's take a motor need. They can no longer, or they're not yet able to tie their shoe, right? So if our expectation is that they're going to tie their shoe and we are going to sit there all day until they tie their shoe, no matter how long we hold that expectation, if they cannot yet tie their shoe, they are not going to be able to do it. So it's our job as parents and caregivers to shift our lens and shift our expectation. Now, that doesn't mean we can't go in and teach, okay, these are the steps, let's try to learn them. These are the things that you're going to do in order to eventually be able to tie your shoe. But until that child can, we have to shift our lens, we have to change our expectation. So a lagging skill is very different than something like a social skill, which is based in the neurotypical paradigm. There may be skills that are lagging that we decide, you know what? This is not something that our child is interested in. This is not something that for whatever reason our child can attain. And we don't necessarily need to follow a neurotypical developmental timeline or, force, say, independence in a certain area that is not fitting to the child. That's going to be decided on a very individualized basis. You're still teaching your child to exist in the world, to have skills, to be able to master them and achieve. And you can look at what their interests are to do that. But that is different than a social skill.
Thank you, Jacqueline. The next question is, how can you tell the difference between what might be a stim versus what is a childlike behavior that should be adjusted? For example, gentle thumb sucking and itching in an inappropriate spot are the specific behaviors this person is thinking of. Both could be normal kid behaviors or they could be stims. And this person is thinking about their daughter who is almost 10.
I could take that one unless you want it, Max.
You're good.
Okay. So my thought about that is you would want to consider whether or not the child is concerned about it. So if a kid comes to me in my office and they say, I really like sucking my thumb. I really like how it makes me feel. It helps me calm down. But some of the kids are starting to make fun of me. Then we're going to process and we're going to talk about that. What is that like when the kids are making fun of you? Why do you think that's happening? We're going to continue to validate, like, how helpful it is for them, and then give the child information to decide, well, do you want to replace it with something else? Do you want to keep doing it? So that would be for something that is not causing harm. An example of a stim that is potentially harmful would be like skin picking to the point of like having constant sores, getting infections and things like that. So you would still take the same affirming approach. You'd be explaining like, hey, this is what I'm really concerned about. This is what I'm noticing is happening to your skin. What do you think about that? And more than likely, the kid's going to be like, yeah, I like how it feels when I pick, but I don't like that there's sores. I don't like the bandages that you have to put on. I don't want to have to go to the doctor, that kind of thing. And then you would do the same suggestion. Well, I have some ideas about things we could do instead. Do you want to try some? And let the kid decide. I don't know if Max or Jacqueline, you would add to that.
Yeah, a little bit. And I just want to clarify the question. Was it trying to figure out what's a stim versus what is a more just a childlike behavior? I'm not sure that it matters, because if it's a benign stim, we're not going to try to replace it. If it's something that your child does that they enjoy and they're happy about it and it's not hurting them and anyone else, then let them stim away. Right? Yes, you might have people looking at you because they're different, but by normalizing that within your family, you're allowing your child to be themselves. If at some point they're starting to feel embarrassed by how people are responding to them, that's when you can look at those replacement behaviors. Or there are times when we're going to work to replace a behavior or stim if the child is harming themselves or others, which is what Lara was talking about. Then yeah, we're going to have to look at how to do that, but we're going to work with the child and help them understand the why in that moment, and look for what else feels comfortable.
Okay, thank you. And along the same lines, I think this next question was addressed in some of what you just said, but I do want to read it. She says, thank you for this thoughtful and enlightening presentation. My question from a parent's perspective, when a child has a behavior that's disruptive to others, like frequent blurting out, interrupting the teacher in the classroom, how do you approach this behavior from a neuroaffirming standpoint? On the one hand, we want to support their passion and excitement about whatever it is they want to share. But on the other, this behavior negatively impacts others, such as a teacher who is teaching and the other students who are trying to listen. And even the child himself, who is missing the opportunity to hear what the teacher is saying. All of this is to ask, when it comes to challenging behaviors like this one, especially when the child doesn't view it as a challenge, how does neuroaffirming therapy balance celebrating and supporting neurodivergent traits while also helping autistic kiddos thrive and succeed in a neurotypical world? That was a long one, but some good thought put into that question.
I'm happy to go again, but I want to give you two a chance too.
Go ahead, I'll add to it if I want to.
So this is one where we would be working with the child and the team, and again, decoding what is happening here, because there's a real issue, right? The child's behavior, even though it's really benign, not trying to cause harm, in no way malicious, just what they need for themselves, is affecting other people's ability to learn. And that's real. So we have to work with the whole group. And that doesn't mean that we're singling out that child when we're talking to the kids, but we're talking to the kids about everyone's different. Everybody has different needs. And then we're working with the teachers in the classroom. All right, what else can this child do in these moments? What might keep the child busy? We're brainstorming as parents, as providers, OTs, therapists. What is the need that the child is meeting, so that we can come up again with a potential replacement behavior, have the child be part of that problem solving. So Ross Green has the collaborative and proactive solutions model, where you have a challenge, an unsolved problem, which is exactly what this would be. And we would hear the child's point of view on it. We would empathize. And then we would also lay out what the issue is and invite the child to problem solve with us and to give ideas so that they are part of that dynamic. And then we would work on it. And it's not going to be easy necessarily, but we're not going to shame or punish the child for it. We're still embracing their individuality and helping them figure out how to meet those same needs, while also keeping in mind the very real needs of the people around them.
And the vocab that comes to mind is competing support needs. So if you have a kid who is a verbal stimmer, and that's really what keeps them engaged and they're like humming, and you have a kid who has auditory sensory overload sitting next to them and needs quiet. So you can think about what to do kind of as a classroom management strategy. Can there be headphones easily available? Is there space for kids to move? So if you need to make sound, like there's plenty of space for you to go do that. If the content isn't engaging enough, which the burden that puts on educators, I think, is significant. But, is there a way to incorporate some special interest into the curriculum so that the need to do some like external behaviors decreases because they're just intrinsically motivated by what's going on?
Thank you so much. Lots of great recommendations. And you mentioned the classroom and working with educators. The next question is, are you bringing this presentation to MCPS educators, Montgomery County Public Schools?
We are trying. Laura and I presented last year to the Special Education Committee, which is a bunch of parents. I have offered in my son's homeschool quite a bit to get in there and do this, and we'll probably do it through the PTA on a very small level. We are trying. If someone has, the contact that is going to allow that to happen, we would love to make it happen. We have tried to start to, through PTAs and other such things, get the schools to start looking at reforms in behavior management and changing not necessarily their SEL approach, but their rewards and consequences systems, for example, and understanding through the neurodiversity lens. And they have not taken it on as an action item as of yet, despite us trying. So I would say the more parents can get in there, MCPS, DC, wherever families are, and say, hey, we want this. Hey, we want you to see this differently. Please do it. On an individual level, like at a grassroots level, when we are in IEP meetings, 504 meetings, we are trying to shift the language of the IEPs through our recommendations when we're advocating for kiddos to make these changes. When we're writing testing reports, we're using language in our recommendations to try to get the IEPs to match that. It is an uphill battle. So anything parents can do to also let the schools know they want this, we are here and we are more than willing to jump in there.
Thank you. That actually sets up the next question quite well, because this parent is, wants to be able to talk to their child's teachers. She asked, what suggestions do you all have for parents on how to go about educating their autistic child's teachers, especially the gen ed teachers, in a way that is more likely to be perceived as collaborative and not alienating?
Do you want to also read the question following that? Because I feel like we can probably answer
yes
together.
As a parent, how can I educate teachers about the necessity of neurodiversity-affirming practice when the child is too young to self-advocate?
I have some thoughts that come to mind. I've worked in a school setting before, and these teachers are not getting, nearly paid enough to deal with everything that they're dealing with, and they do not have the resources that they need. So they are drowning, and yes, they can perceive it as a threat for us to say, hey, you're not doing enough, basically. So I would start there to start from a place of empathy, to be like, listen, I know you're not paid enough. You've got a lot on your plate, and come from a place of like, I'm here to help you because I am learning what is helping my child, and I want to help you work smarter, not harder. Yeah, that's a start.
So I would add to that. I was actually just meeting with a couple of other testers and discussing something very similar to this. And, one of the things that you can do is put together a little information sheet. Here's my kid. Here are their strengths. Here are their vulnerabilities. Here's what really works for them. And if you want to learn more, here are some great resources, and kind of beginning to direct them to some of those neurodiversity affirming resources, like the ones that we're sharing with you. see how that's received. You can then build from there to add in more over time. But that one sheet about your own child is a really nice way to start.
All right. The next question shifts over to medical professionals. How do you recommend approaching conversations with medical professionals and deciding if medication may be right for your child, especially if your child is still too young to provide input in making decisions about this?
Yeah.
So my thought is, and this is my recommendation to parents and caregivers, is that children are never too young to be part of it. You're just going to really change the language and how you approach it, what that's going to look like, because this goes back to the conversations that we had around the problem with ABA and these compliance-based therapies, is we really want kids to be tuned into their bodies and to trust their bodies. So I want to give them as much information as we can. So what this might look like is having the conversation with the medical professional first. What are the options? What even could we do? Would this be beneficial? What would this look like? And then having a conversation with the kid, like, hey, you know how you said it's really hard when you want to play with your friends at recess and you get so worried that you end up sitting in the classroom crying, right? So your kid is describing high levels of anxiety and it's distressing them, right? This isn't the kid who's playing happily by themselves. This is a kid who's really distressed by it. And then you can explain, well, I talked to psychiatrist, pediatrician, and so they had some ideas about a medicine that could help with that. Do you want to hear about it? Obviously, this is going to look different depending on the age of the kid. And you would explain to them what that might look like and how it might help and say, hey, and we would try it for this length of time. And then we would check in and see what you thought about it. So you're letting them know that they're an ongoing part of that process. And just because they say yes now does not mean they can't revoke consent later. And I think the focus really is on, is your child themselves experiencing distress? And that is always my motivating factor for even exploring, like, hey, check in and like, why don't you see what options are available?
Great. So it really sounds like you're trying to involve the child at all developmental levels. Okay, so then the next question is for a parent who is, going to possibly new providers. She asks, what, quote, deeper, unquote, questions can we ask providers to ensure they affirm neurodiversity? So are there code words or questions that you can, a parent can throw out to figure out what how a provider feels about neurodiversity affirming care?
Yeah. Max, do you want to take this or do you want me?
I could start at least. I mean, for starters, you can ask, what do you know, or what is your understanding of neurodiversity, to put the burden on them to explain it, to see if they seem to understand it. You can say, hey, what do you think about ABA? Because a lot of neurodiversity affirming professionals will say, oh, I'm anti-ABA. I love this question, and I'm going to continue thinking about it while someone else gives their insight.
Yeah. So I think going back to those red flags and green flags and asking questions using those words, how do you support my child when my child is having a tough moment? How do you understand behavior? Are you using rewards and consequences? How do you decide what the goals are going to be in the therapy, right? You want to listen to that they're hearing your child, right? How do you create a session for my child is another way to ask that, because if it's all based on what the therapist wants or even what the parents want, that's probably not affirming. My child is autistic. What does that mean to you? What is your understanding of autism? When you think about autism, how do you look at diagnosis, right? Are they using the DSM? Are they using the medical model? What do you know about the social model of disability? So pulling language, I would say, from this report, it's a great question. I haven't thought about it in exactly those terms before, like Max, but I hope that using language you've heard today, particularly around those red and green flags, would be most helpful. Understanding of masking, understanding of ableism. These are key things that a neurodiversity affirming therapist is going to know about.
Okay. I'm going to skip to a follow-up question about the medication. The parent wants to clarify, wouldn't you have to tell them about risks? And if they're really young, I'm not sure how they could really provide an opinion beyond what they are picking up from adults.
I would tell them, I'd be like, hey, these are some of the ways that some people feel from these medicines. And I wouldn't frame it as like something scary. I would just frame it as something like interesting. Like, isn't that interesting? Like, when you take cough medicine and afterwards you go, huh, this is going to be like that for some people. They might go, huh, afterwards, or right. You're just providing information kind of in a neutral way, right? So you don't be like, oh man, so many people, they have really bad stomach aches, but I'm sure you'll be fine. So you're not framing it like that, which I think would be right, the concern that I think you're voicing. But I absolutely would give information on both sides.
Okay. I know we have one more question. I know we are already at 8:34. Are you okay with answering the last question?
Sure.
Yeah.
Okay, so this parent was asking again about the schools, and I think you answered that question. So the next question is, you use empowering language about autism, but it doesn't match up with how it's often talked about and what people think they see in autistic people. So how do you bridge the gap in understanding so that more people shift their frame of thinking willingly?
By doing exactly what we are doing now, right? By being allies, by talking, by centering autistic voices, by educating more and more people so that we can begin to shift towards this paradigm more and more. You are right? We are a minority in terms of how we are speaking about autism. Now, more and more, I would say every day, every week, every month, I see providers talking with this language. I see people joining groups with neurodiversity affirming providers. I hear parents who are looking for neurodiversity affirming providers. It is getting out there. It is a process, but the more everyone who starts to learn can educate other people, the more we spread the awareness and the knowledge that we have, because most people, particularly through the classic model, we're picturing something very specific and something that is only really a small percentage of autistic people when we say autism. And that's very problematic. You're right about that. So the more we can put people in the spotlight, share celebrities who are autistic, who have put that out there for people to recognize, like, hey, this is not what you thought it was. Highlighting those people is key.
Okay, we just have a few more. Do you have, you did list resources, but this person wants to know if you have any recommended local providers for social skills learning.
Sure do. My practice runs virtual Minecraft groups for elementary and middle school, and D&D and pop culture groups for teens, and a social connection group for young adults. Jacqueline, I know your practice has some groups.
So we have, for adults and young adults, we have neurodiversity affirming social interaction groups where people are coming together and talking about their experiences. We have an in-person D&D group. So go to Laura if you want virtual, go to us if you want in-person, for the D&D or really tabletop role-playing games groups. And then we also, through our practice, have a nonprofit that is really just getting off the ground. And we are offering student service hours through Mind for right now middle school and high schoolers to come together. So it's a combination of neurodivergent and neurotypical kids working together, learning about each other's brains. This is another way that we are trying to kind of bridge the gap and get kids out in the world who understand, like, hey, different brains are cool. I know also the DC Peers, I think Monica, I saw pop in here, does a lot of that same beautiful work as well, through their groups. And there are other providers in other parts of Maryland and DC that we could recommend, who are doing similar work.
I would say there's not a ton, but we exist here.
Amongst all the services that you mentioned, as well as the providers that you know, what about services for the parent or family?
Yeah. So we do
directed to the parents.
Both practices do a lot of individualized parent coaching. Right now, our practice is about to launch a PDA parenting group that has not actually been announced yet, but I'll just put that out there. And then also,
actually, Jacqueline, while you're talking about that PDA group, someone is asking about your view on the
sure.
PDA diagnosis, because I know that there's some.
I can jump right to that in a second. So we have a PDA parenting group, and then we're also trying to get a parenting group off the ground for parents of just generally, and this is broad term, neurodivergent kiddos. So kiddos who are in the world in a different way, and the parents want support from other parents whose kids are also different. So we are building that group right now as well. And so whether you want individual or group work, both practices have stuff going on where we can help. In terms of PDA, we think it's real. We have read a lot of the literature. We have seen a lot of kids who fit the PDA profile. We're diagnosing PDA through testing and recommending supports based on that. We are beginning to work with educators of particular kids to help them understand the PDA profile. So many kids, autistic, ADHD, otherwise, have some measure of demand avoidance, but PDA is bigger, stronger, more prolific. Laura, I'm gonna let you jump in because you also have strong opinions about this, I know. But yes, we definitely think it's real.
Mm-hmm. And I think there's a similar conversation to be had about providing more education, even amongst therapists. So there are, secret therapist Facebook groups where we search for referrals. And so anytime someone says, hey, like this was a recent post, like I'm looking for a provider for a 4-year-old with ODD, which is oppositional defiant disorder. And I was like, whoa, hey, felt a little bit like a salesperson, but I was like, have you heard of, and I sent a resource, like, I think you should really look into this because it's not really well known. So these are the kids that are being identified as defiant and problematic, or maybe it's just as simple as school refusal that nobody can really sort out where it's coming from, that because the kid seems fine at school, the teacher's not reporting any problems, they have friends, the whole list. So they fall under the category of how could they possibly be autistic? And it turns out that they have this really high masking profile that is making their life really difficult, but it's presenting so internally that people aren't recognizing it.
And I know I didn't keep to my word. There is one more question. And you talked about masking. This person is asking, what are good ways to help an autistic adult, especially late diagnosed, to unmask?
I can speak to that because I am a late diagnosed person who is still learning how to unmask. One book recommendation is Divergent Mind by Janara Narenberg. I'm a book person. Not everyone's a book person, and that's okay. Or online, you can find resources for this type of thing of spending time when you're alone, listening to your body and doing what it wants to do instead of what feels normal. That might even mean turning on music and closing your eyes and closing the curtains and just moving in a way that feels natural. I mean, this is something we all could benefit from, whether you're autistic or not. But finding spaces where you feel safe to be yourself. Even when you're alone, you will find yourself masking. So it might start with doing it when you're alone, just exploring, like, what would I do if I felt like no one was judging me, and if I was not judging myself? What would feel good in meeting my sensory needs? There are online like sensory needs profilers, because a lot of us aren't even aware of what our needs are, so we can't even meet them. I've seen videos online of people demonstrating different stims so that you can get ideas and try them. Because if you've grown up not stimming, repeat, the name of the book is Divergent Mind. It's by Janara Narenberg. I recommend that to a lot of people. Even if you're not autistic, it is a way to understand that, like, you don't have to, Unmasking Autism is another one. I haven't read it myself, but I've heard good things about it. Divergent Mind, I recommend to people who aren't aware of their sensory needs, even people who are not autistic. We all mask to a certain extent, and so I think it's helpful for a lot of people.
Yeah, I will add, that's what a lot of people are doing in therapy. I work with a lot of young adults or even slightly older, recently diagnosed, and that's what we spend a lot of time on. What is the masking? How do I unmask? When and where do I want to unmask? How do I deal with the fact that it's scary? There is another autistic provider in our area who runs groups using the Unmasking Autism book, who also would be a wonderful resource. So if you reach out to me or Laura, we can give you her info to share. There, a lot of it. Also, there are a couple practices that will work with adults through occupational therapy, and that is another way to strongly promote unmasking, whether you're talking about a kid or an adult, as long as you're doing affirming work.
But also, masking does serve a purpose, and so sometimes it's not safe for someone to unmask, or they don't want to, and so it's just up to the person. And maybe you can unmask in some ways but choose not to in others. I'm masked for this presentation because I don't feel comfortable being super autistic in front of you guys.
And I think keeping in mind too, thank you for sharing that, Max. Keeping in mind too that certain minority populations, when we're talking about intersectionality, may mask more for safety needs as well.
I think we're at the end. Thank you so much. Sue, do you want to?
Yeah. Okay.
There's one more question that I have a quick response to.
Okay.
The suggestions for young adult when they recently diagnosed is that I would look for an autistic therapist, one who is working within the neurodiversity affirming paradigm, because, again, there's internalized ableism, but somebody who is out and talking about it. And I think that is the best option, to have someone matched with someone of their neurotype.
There is a thing, you can look it up, ND, it's Neurodivergent Therapist Directory. I think it's, the website is ND Therapist Directory, that has a list of a number of providers who identify as neurodivergent.
Yeah, I will add to that, just seeing that question, complex PTSD, as we're diagnosing autism in older people at our practice, we're often diagnosing complex PTSD at the same time. Trauma, basically, from living in a world as an autistic person that is always telling you that you are bad and wrong, and internalizing that message throughout life. So it is sadly a very common phenomenon. So getting help from someone who really understands, ideally from an autistic therapist, is fantastic.
Okay. Have we gotten to the end of the questions then, Melanie?
A lot of thank yous.
Okay, wonderful. Okay, well, I'll add my thank you. Thank you so much, Jacqueline, Laura, and Max, for sharing so much important, really important information tonight. I want to invite everybody in the audience to complete our very short 2-question feedback form, and I put the link in the chat. So we've recorded this presentation. We will email a link to that recording in the next few days. There are a lot of resources on the slides as well, and we will figure out a way to get all those resource links to everyone who registered for this as well, one way or another. Also, I just do want to point out that we will be having another speaker. Our next speaker event is on Tuesday, April 18th. It's going to be about how to write SMART goals in your child's IEP. So please mark your calendar and register for that. I'll put that link in the chat in just a second. Anyway, thank you so much to our wonderful presenters. We really appreciate all the time and effort you put into creating a really fantastic and informative and engaging presentation. So thank you so much. And everyone, good night.